And I'll be handing over to Tim Evans, who's the CEO of Worth Unlimited. We're delighted to have him with us this evening, and he's going to give us three little bits of input. Firstly, around what is detached youth work and why should we think about doing it. Then we'll have a bit of time to talk in small groups. Then we'll come back. We've interviewed three detached youth workers about their experiences, and so you'll come back to a video with just hearing a few of their thoughts about their own experiences of detached youth work. Then Tim will give us a little bit more input around how we might actually go about engaging with young people. We'll have a bit more time in small groups to reflect on that. Come back to another little video of clips from these interviews, and then Tim will finish off for us with thinking about the things we need to think about before we venture out and start off, perhaps with a new piece of work. And then that will be it. So our aim is to be finished by 8:30. We're delighted you're here and able to join us. It's lovely to have so many people here, and I'm sure we'll all learn a lot from each other. And yes, really want to emphasise that it is an opportunity for us to hear from each other and share our experiences, share our thoughts, perhaps share our concerns and even anxieties about moving into a different way of seeking to engage with young people, but a way of responding to God's call on all our lives to reach out to those beyond the doors of the church buildings. So before I hand over formally to Tim, I'll just pray briefly for us all, if that's okay. So just take a moment just to focus on being in God's presence and being present to one another. Lord, we ask that you will be with us, that you will enrich us as we spend time with you and each other. We ask that we would hear again your call upon us to seek those beyond the church community, to share your love with young people. And we think particularly of those young people at the moment coping with all the difficulties and changes, the disruptions of the time that we find ourselves in. And we ask that you would help us to find new ways to share your love with them. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so Tim, this is the point where I hand over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Thank you for welcoming me to your gathering. And like Sam says, I hope that it's going to be a time for us all to learn kind of from each other. Welcome to everyone comments on this, so I'll do it straight away. Welcome to my messy office, like my little home office. So before anybody starts putting it in the chat about, my goodness me, what a messy office that man has, then I'm owning up to it like straight away. It's my attempt to look like some kind of I don't know what, like intelligent professory type person and failing miserably, but that's my messy office. So anyway, thank you for having me. Like Sam says, now I don't know how many people have done any form of detached youth work or youth work outside of the church building, and how many people haven't. So this might be a chance for us to learn from each other. Some people, maybe you're thinking about doing this for the first time. For some people, you're maybe done it a few times, done it a bit before, got a bit of experience with it. So it's a chance for us all to kind of learn together. I want to acknowledge everybody's kind of feelings and experiences and story kind of behind all of that. You know, if it's something where you're thinking, oh, I quite like to do something like this, or my church would quite like to do something like this, but I'm a bit anxious about it, that's perfectly fine. Other people can, feel very confident about it and think, yeah, great, just give me a few tools and I'll be away. So we might have a wide range of people kind of in the room. So it's all right to be where you're at. That's perfectly fine. So as Sam says, I'm Tim. I know I don't look like it, but I've been doing youth work for 27 years full time, and then a couple of years kind of before that. And my first actual encounter with detached youth work, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do tonight, was I became a Christian when I was at university. And I thought I'd better do something with this newfound faith business. and see, I didn't have any theology then, so newfound faith business was as far as I could get with the kind of theological kind of thinking. And I started volunteering for Student Community Action, which is the student volunteering program. So I didn't volunteer for a Christian project, but there were lots of Christians that got involved. And I went to university in Swansea. So if you've ever been to Swansea, down by the sea, it's a very nice place to go. But Swansea is surrounded by 7 council estates, and a couple of them in particular were particularly notorious at the time that I went in the early 90s. And being a naive new Christian and a naive student, I thought, let's see what I can volunteer with. So I volunteered with a Detached youth work project, which is we took a van up onto these estates on a weekly basis and attempted to connect with local young people. So it's a bit of a baptism of fire. My standing joke, if this is all right, is I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but the only time I got stoned at university was nothing to do with drugs, which is I made the mistake of driving the van into a cul-de-sac and then having a line of young people at the bottom of the cul-de-sac who decided that they were going to stone the van as it drove back out again, and I had to explain why the van had lots of dents in it and stuff. So I had a very early experience of detached youth work, which was fun and enlightening, but also it was a chance to see some real change amongst those young people, even when I was at that age and stuff. So I'm very passionate kind of about it. So that's kind of where my story kind of started, really. And I've carried on doing youth work for good or for ill, kind of ever since. And I love the difference that youth work can make to young people's lives. So it's great to have so many of you kind of with us tonight to talk about this stuff. I should say that, the reason I set the exercise about what would you do with a fiver and what would you do with your evening out was it's interesting to hear what people would do. I'm quite up for the adventure golf and the ice cream. If you're allowed to combine those two things together, I'll have those two things together if that's all right. But to say that spending time outdoors when you're that age is a perfectly natural way of doing what in community development you term associational life. So it's a very natural way for young people who don't want to spend all their time indoors, who want to spend time with their friends, but don't have access to some of the things that adults have. And beyond that point where they want to go and do things with their parents, it's a very natural thing for young people to do. So not all young people will line up at the bottom of a cul-de-sac and try and stone a van that you're driving. So please don't hear that is the be all and end all, because you hear all kinds of scare stories about young people hanging out and spending, you hear, oh, there's young people hanging out at the shops, there's young people hanging out at the bus shelter, there's young people hanging out at the park. We should do something about these young people. And most young people are just doing it to spend time with their friends, and because they've got nowhere else to go. They're not doing it because they're trying to be naughty or get into trouble or anything like that. So do not think that doing detached youth work is necessarily about engaging with young people who are up to no good, because that isn't true for the vast majority of young people. So here's what we're going to attempt to do tonight, if that's all right. So I've got, if you want, sorry, I should have said at the beginning as well, there's quite a few of you, so I don't mind if you want to unmute and ask me a question or make a comment, but a good way to do this is to use the chat button. So if you can find the chat button on Zoom, which is in the bottom toolbar normally, then feel free to put stuff in the chat, ask questions, make comments, correct me if you want. That's all fine. Let's have a bit of interaction tonight. I don't want you to feel that this is going to be an hour and 20 minutes of me chuntering on, because it isn't going to be. But this is why we're going to do that. So let me just move the chat button away from there so I can see. So I'm about to move my screen about as we go. So we're going to think about what is detached youth work and why should we do it in this little section to start with. And then, like Sam says, we're going to have a bit of a breakout room and then a video each time we're going to do that. We're going to think about how to do it. What does building relationships with young people look like? And what are the kind of skills and qualities that we might need? How might we need to approach it in order to think about building those kind of relationships with those young people? We're going to think about how to start out. What are the things we need to have in place? What are the things that we need to think about before we do it? And we're going to have a little bit of a look at a bit of a development process of detached youth work. So we're going to think about what's the journey that you might go on with a group of young people that you encounter outside of your church building, in your community, in your neighbourhood, in your world. We're going to have a bit of a look at that. Does that sound all right? Is that okay for people? Is that all right? I can't see everybody on the screen, so I'm kind of hoping that is going to be okay. Great. So I've already talked about this, about why I set that exercise to do. Did that, like, stick in the chat if that, does that make sense to you in terms of how young people spend time together? Anybody want to make comments about that? Like, as you thought about that exercise for yourself, like, what do you think that's like for young people doing that? Do you count that as a positive experience? Did you do that when you were a teenager? That's a good question. If you remember being a teenager, it's a long time. I'm 50 next week, so being a teenager is a long time ago for me. But I spent time in the park playing football all the time, like with my friends. The only time I ever got into trouble was we decided we were going to reenact the FA Cup final goal that we'd seen that year on the grass tennis courts. And we got in a lot of trouble for scarring the grass tennis courts. So that's the only time I got into trouble, like, for being in the park. So does that make sense? People, stick stuff in the chat. If you've not already said about what your evening out would be, stick that kind of in there. Let's get a bit of interaction kind of going. Yeah, young people feel judged hanging out. Absolutely. I think that is one of the biggest issues that that goes on. One of the things that Sam and I were talking actually about when we were talking about this call was I'm a big fan of what's intergenerational work. So helping young people build connections with adults and adults to build connections with young people. That's not just a youth worker, but actually young people feeling part of community life. And if we do any of these sessions again, if you ever invite me back, I'd love to talk to you a bit more about intergenerational community building, about young people and social action and contributing to their community, helping young people be a positive force for good and learning some of those skills as they do that. I think that's really important because it breaks the stereotype, doesn't it? Like, of all that. So 3 hours felt like a long time. Absolutely. Young people and boredom is a thing. Young people will do stuff when they're bored. If they feel they've got nothing to do. I've just started to get to know some young people who started hanging out at the top of my road. And I was talking to them the other day and I said, how are you finding, because they've been like breaking bottles and scattering glass and stuff a little bit. And I was like, well, how are you finding COVID and stuff? And, you know, being locked down, they're just like, we're really bored. We've got nothing to do. So we started a conversation then about, well, what are the kind of things you'd like to do? Maybe smashing bottles on my road is not the most helpful thing that you could be doing. But it started a conversation, like, with a group of young people. So boredom is one of those things. Down the basketball, tennis court, yeah, absolutely. I spend a lot of time football, tennis, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Hard in the winter, yeah. Winter is a tough. Like, you sometimes see them shivering in the bus stop because they still want to be with their friends and stuff. Some enlightened councils and stuff have put up like shelters for young people that enable them to spend time like together without kind of having to be indoors. But yeah, winter is a difficult time to do all that. Okay, so a few kind of thoughts beginning to kind of emerge there. So keep sticking stuff in the chat as we go along. So just thinking about, in fact, think this, like, if you thought about detached youth work, I mean, this might be teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, but if you thought about detached youth work, what is it? What actually is it? What do you think it is? If I say detached youth work to you, what comes to mind? Stick that in the chat. Like I said, I can't see all of you, so like I can't see who's wanting to say what. So the chat is probably the best thing to do. Outside a building, going out to young people, out in the community, meeting people where they're at. Yep. Anyone else? People being in their spaces, yeah, being outside our comfort zone. That's one of the joys and challenges of detached youth work. Is it cannot always be comfortable. young people focused. Yeah, very good. I see you know all this stuff. Yeah, so one of the reasons that Sam asked me to do this session was because because it's a good way of working with young people, it's a good way of connecting with young people, but also the particular circumstances in which we're in, which is obviously the COVID stuff, where if you were running inside youth work, that's either not possible or only possible in a certain kind of way inside. And so detached youth work is a way of being able to do that during the current period in which we're in. So yeah, okay. So, I don't want to use too much jargon, but youth work. So detached youth work is youth work that delivers informal and social education, which is basically saying that working with young people is a learning process for them and for you, even if that learning process is through fun, conversation, activity. Young people are learning through their relationship with you, and you helping grow their relationships with each other, and you're helping them think about what's important to them, and helping them think about what their life entails and what they would like their life to be like. All of that is, even just through the most informal conversation, is a learning process for young people. So you might be on this call thinking, oh, I'm not sure what skills I've got. Your own story is a really important part of what you've got to offer young people. So young people can learn from your story, and you can learn from theirs. So of course there are some skills about relating to young people and getting to know young people, but don't think of it as something that's just for some a few kind of professional experts. Like lots and lots and lots of people can get to know young people and spend time with young people and help them think about their lives. So I hope that everybody is here because they feel they've got something to share. And like I say, your own life story, your own experiences of life is an important part of helping young people learn and grow if they're in the right kind of relationship with you. And it's also about responding to whatever needs and opportunities arise. So detached youth work is quite a flexible way of working with young people, because it's about responding to what happens in the moment. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, stick stuff in the chat on questions and stuff if any of that doesn't. It enables you, it takes place where young people are at, both geographically and developmentally. So they are where they are. So someone who said earlier about meeting them where they're at, and Sam's just stuck the book in the chat. It's a really good book. Richard Passmore is a good friend of mine, good friend of Sam's, good friend of John's, and I suspect some of the other of you. It's a text that's quite old, like he wrote it quite a long time ago now, but it's still, I think, a really good book about engaging people with where they're at. And that's the great thing about detached youth work, is that you get to meet young people on their terms, where they're at, wherever they're at in terms of their own development. It's without the use of a building, so that's pretty obvious, and people have said that. Some people do outreach work, which is about, we've got a building, we'd like young people to come, but we want to spend time getting to know young people in order to be able to invite them to the building. That's not quite detached youth work, that's outreach work, but there's nothing wrong with that way of working. You can still use all the tools that we're talking about tonight to build relationships with young people and get to know them, to them about what they might like to see happen in another space. You can do that. And it happens, that someone else said this earlier, I think, it happens in spaces which young people might identify as their own ground. So street corners, bus shelters, parks, cafes, shopping precincts, waste grounds, end of my road, wherever it is that you might encounter groups of young people. Out of interest, if you thought about your own community, where do young people hang out? Do you know where young people hang out in your patch? Just stick that in the chat. Park and a skate park, McDonald's, absolutely. I'm not a big fan of McDonald's, but you got to learn to eat it because young people spend half their lives there. I think local park, local woods, yeah, recreation grounds. That's what I did when I was a teenager. Under the footbridge, yeah, cafe, park, by the shops, park, yeah. So pretty common ground, isn't it, about where young people spend time. and where they hang out. Dispersal orders. So on the beach, who's by the beach? Wow, you're very lucky. I'm going to come and do detached youth work with you, Sam, because you're by the beach, and that sounds excellent to me. I quite like the idea of youth work on the beach. In the bus shelter, yeah. On the wall outside churches, yeah. Sometimes churches, walls, church grounds can often be places actually that young people like find themselves hanging out, actually, because there's a bit of grass, there's a wall, there's a bit of space. They can do spooky things if you've got a graveyard, all that kind of stuff is exciting, like for young people. So you've got a few different places there. One of the things we're going to talk about a bit later is just making sure we meet young people in a safe environment for us. So underneath a bridge, for example, like demands a bit of thinking about just to make sure that somewhere like that is safe to meet young people, for example, if it's hidden away, do you know what I mean, etc. So there's a whole range of different things on the BT box facing your house. Yeah. So young people find all kinds of places, don't they, to do that. So hopefully you've got the idea that young people spend time usually in the outdoors. Shopping malls, shopping centres, though, is another place where young people often spend time. So when they're on the inside, often you get security guards trying to chase them out the place. But shopping centres can be a place that young people often hang out. So detached youth work is mainly outside, but it doesn't have to be outside. There are indoor spaces like bus stations, shopping malls, etc., that young people will kind of spend time in. So let's quickly do this before our first break. So what are the benefits and challenges of doing detached youth work? You can see this as a benefit or a challenge, but it's their turf. You're going to their patch. But my take would be that's also God's turf. That's God's patch. So the beginning of John, God about incarnation and God becoming part of moving into the neighbourhood. So God is present in the world. So the turf that you are going to go on and talk to young people in is also the turf that God is already present at. So I think that's an important place to think about and to have some confidence in. You're starting where they are. And so that's the right place to start with them. You don't have to think about anything else other than where are these young people at and how do I engage them. You haven't got to think about a venue. Those of us who've done youth work a long time can think of many times when we've had to clear up things that are broken in a venue. We've had to go and see the church warden the next day and apologise for the breakage that has just happened, etc. So you haven't got a venue to worry about. If you're into this whole thinking about power dynamics, so you're on a par with young people much more because actually you're not policing a building, you're not managing their behaviour, you're not doing some of those other things. You're simply trying to build a relationship with one human being to another human being. And so that makes the relationship a bit different even to other forms of youth work, I think. You're there as their guest. So normally in youth work, you are the host. You open the church door, the church hall, you open it up and young people come in and you do a youth club or whatever it is that you end up doing. They're a guest in your territory as much as you make it something that they own, etc. You're a guest in their patch by doing detached youth work. And it seems to me that is really similar to how Jesus spent a lot of time with people, that Jesus was often a guest. He was never a host. He was always hanging out at somebody else's, whether he met them on the road, whether he went to their house for dinner, whether it's Zacchaeus and he invited himself over. He was so often a guest in other people's spaces. Jesus sent the disciples out and he sent them out to find people of peace. He says, go to this town. It's in Matthew, isn't it? And so detached youth work is, I think, going out and finding people of peace. And people of peace are people who will welcome you, who will let you shake the dust off your feet, to quote the biblical passage. And so I think detached youth work is finding those young people of peace who will welcome you into their group, who will want to get to know you, and they will bring a lot of their friends along with that process. And you get to see what God's up to in the world. So this idea, if you're into mission thinking, Missio Deo, so this idea that God's up to stuff in the world and mission is about joining in with whatever you see God up to kind of in the world. So you get the joy of seeing what is God up to with these groups of young people and how do I get to join in with it. So there's a few, even if you're feeling a bit anxious about it, there's a lot of positive things to think about with working in this particular way, and to remember that it's actually all about relationships, you know, where young people are not consuming an activity that you're putting on, that they are there just to build a relationship with, and that's the primary kind of function. It's about being committed to that group of young people, and it's about general mutual reciprocal relationships. And that can be really life-giving for you as an adult as much as it can be for young people in terms of who they are. And I love this quote. I use this all the time to talk about youth work, that youth work is about doing life as it is lived with young people. So you get the chance to hear their stories, to hear what's going on in their lives, to be someone who's constructive and positive in their world as life is done with them. And it seems to me that Jesus does that a lot, that he responds to what's going on in people's lives as it is going on in their lives, and then helps them make some sense of that in the context of the love of God for them. And that seems to me to be a really powerful way of working. Is that all right? So that's the first whistle stop tour. Is everyone okay? I can't see everybody, so you'll have to just put your thumbs up the people I can see, and other people may say yes in the chat or whatever. But is that okay? Everyone okay? Everyone all right with where we're at? Like that all right for people getting to just you to think about it? So we're going to, brilliant. So we're going to do our first breakout session. I think the question is about to go in the chat, which is, I want you to think about, okay, so if it's about meeting young people on their turf and meeting them where they're at and going to where the geographical places where they hang out and stuff, what are the kind of skills and qualities that you think that you need? How do you need to approach that in order to make that a really positive experience for you and for them? Does that make sense? So I think we're going to put you into breakout rooms. I don't know if someone needs to explain the breakout rooms, but we're going to put you into breakout rooms. If you have we only be in small groups. If you could explore that question together, there'll be a host in your room to help you do that. And you've got a few minutes to do that, if that's all right. I hope you had a good conversation. Was it all right?
Yes.
Yeah, a few nods. Yeah. Good to meet some new people, if you've not met people before. Excellent. Very good. So I think we're going to show a little video, I believe. So
my role involves overseeing a number of projects that the charity runs across Devon. The roots of the charity were in Brixham, in Torbay. The project was started by Brixham United Reformed Church in 2007 with a way to reach out to young people who are very much on the edge, and young people that perhaps the church wasn't engaging, and actually wanted to demonstrate that the church is there to meet their needs. So the street-based work just really drew me to it, because I just liked the fact that anything could happen. You could deal with anything. There wasn't a set programme. You were working with young people exactly where they were at, and that could be in parks, it could be on the streets, it could be outside shops, that kind of thing. And it's seeing people come together, not just from church, but from the community. And people come together and share, learn from one another, but also see young people kind of grow in that environment, and young people being able to present no matter what background, but to be able to come into that environment and learn about themselves, learn about others, learn about their role within society, also that self-discovery as well. And it's often you don't see the results. It's when you see young people 10 years later and they're in their mid to late 20s and they suddenly remember the youth club down at the church and what good it did. And those moments are just so powerful and rewarding. I just can't describe how powerful they are.
I'm currently a third-year ordinand at Westminster College, training for Ministry of Word and Sacrament. But prior to starting at Westminster, I was the senior youth worker for the EDGE project, which is a youth project in inner city Bradford on an estate. And we worked with about 250-ish young people, mainly with young people who were leaving care, looked after, or young carers themselves, but also our main kind of mission was to young people who were at risk of falling over the edge into crime, antisocial behaviour, or any other at-risk group on the estate. Yeah, I think that for me, I've always had a keen passion for young people, and particularly young people who the church wasn't reaching for many reasons. But the joy for me was being able to make a difference in young people's lives. So being there for them, building up a relationship with them, spending a long time building up that relationship. So I was working for the Edge for about 10 years, which meant I saw a number of young people who came all the way through the project, one or two who had their own children just as I left. But the project was there before me, so it was operating for 10 years before I came. So we were seeing the second generation of young people. And having young people who have grown up and then are sending their own young children to the project was just, it showed how much the project meant for people and how much it was valued on the estate.
So my name is Julie Boddington and I work for Sevenoaks Area Youth Trust. We were birthed out of the churches together in the area about 20 years ago now. Really with the mission statement and the purpose to reach young people that actually weren't connecting with anything to do with church in any other way in their lives. It's not you being the authority figure there. It's you stepping into their space and being genuinely interested with them, in them. I love this work. I just think that the privilege of bringing God's love to those who don't consciously know that the source of all goodness and love and blessing in life is actually the Lord. It's such a joy to go in God's name and want to bless them with kindness, want to bless them with a nice experience and a fun time without any added ons. You know, we're not a recruitment agency for the local churches. We're not the community police. We're not the teachers at their school who are trying to get them to reach certain targets. Yeah. We are people who just want to relate. Our God is a relational God. The whole purpose of gospel is about reconciliation and good relationship. And so it's a joy to go and meet young people where they're choosing to spend time and be genuinely interested in them. Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't have the option to be out in the total lockdown, but we were very keen as soon as there was some movement to actually just be going out and genuinely asking how young people were and just genuinely saying this must be a tough time for you, or, you know, do you think, oh, who is it you live at home with and is it being tough for them? And, you know, domestic violence has increased hugely. We're very aware of the impact of violence on young people that we see. Mm-hmm. You know, the ones who are sitting in the park in the rain on an evening like tonight are the ones who home isn't a nice place to be. Although our detached work is with a rucksack wandering along to the park, we also, pre-COVID, were driving a youth bus that was basically like a portable room where we could have a base to offer hot chocolate and offer homemade cakes from people in the local churches. Yeah. Our strapline is believe in your worth. And actually there's something about a freshly homemade cake that's been made for you with love is quite a powerful way of saying that to young people, and a nice hot chocolate with a bit of milk in the top, nice and frothy.
Wow, brilliant. What do we make of that? Be interested to stick in the chat any kind of initial, just so that we capture before I shimmy on, what struck you about those 3 interviews? because I thought they were brilliant. Hot chocolate, yeah. There's actually a really good youth work project in Dundee that is called Hot Chocolate, precisely because they started with giving hot chocolate to young people, and then they thought they called their whole organisation Hot Chocolate. So, passion and dedication, yeah. Yep. Young people and food, absolutely. Food is a sacred thing. We kind of lost that in our Western culture, but in Jewish culture, in the time Jesus' time, food was a sacred thing. It was a holy thing to eat with others. Genuinely enjoy being with young people, absolutely. Absolutely. Those people here who've been doing this a long time will tell you that exactly one of the things that keeps you going, even though they can be a pain in the backside sometimes, is that young people are absolutely amazing and they're brilliant to spend time with, even the really difficult ones. Showing young people their worth and their value just through being with them. Yeah, absolutely. So you shouldn't underestimate this idea of showing up. Like showing up, not many adults show up in their lives. So don't underestimate that whole thing about just showing up and being caring. That'll get you a long way. Love without an agenda. Yeah, so I was struck by the lady who was talking about we're not teachers, we're not social workers, we're not parents, we're not any of those other things. Youth work is quite a unique thing about you don't have that authority in the same way that other adults do in their lives. And that means you can have a different kind of relationship with them. Yeah, desperate to be with those for whom home is not a safe place to be. That there will be a lot of outworkings of COVID, I think, that that one of them was talking about in particular. I mean, a lot of people we're seeing that in our work around the country. And some of you may have seen that. Okay, anyone else? Great. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Hopefully this is going to work. Oh, there we go. Brilliant. So let me just get my chat box up because I want to carry on with that. So tell me what you thought. Ignore the slide that's up there now, but tell me what you talked about in your groups. You've already named some of the things from the interviews that you've just seen. What are the kind of qualities that you think you need in order to do this kind of work? What kind of skills and qualities do we need to have? You can rename some of the things if you like that were that you said in the reflections on the interviews. But what do we need to bring with us? Genuine heart for young people, absolutely. Importance of listening, excellent. Yeah. Resilience, absolutely. To keep going. If you have a bad session, you go again. Being relatable to young people, yeah, but that can take many forms. So some people are outward going and charismatic and all that kind of stuff. Other people have different ways of relating to young people, and that's all good skills. Being real with young people, absolutely. Being willing to be uncomfortable. Passion, patience. Yeah, I thought that was a little preach on the way go there with the P's. Very good. Yeah, and learn to grow ourselves, absolutely. One of the reasons I actually love doing youth work and working in communities is like you're continually learning. You learn from others. My vicar has done a PhD, as vicars tend to do, in this idea of reciprocal hospitality. So this idea of when we let other people be hosts to us, they can teach us an enormous amount about God. And my take is even Jesus a couple of times was very surprised by what he encountered. When he encounters the Roman centurion, he says, there's more faith here than there is in the whole of Israel. I'm really surprised by that. All that kind of stuff, that actually God shows himself in all kinds of ways through this. Able to deal with banter, absolutely. I am a Fulham supporter, if you're a Fulham football fan, and I have to put up with enormous amounts of banter and mickey taking because of my football team. Thinking on your feet, being adaptable, absolutely. Yeah. Great. Okay, so I would think you've almost got my list actually that I'm about to show you. This is just my little list, and you might want to add to it. So I think Sam talked about this, about willing to be open and vulnerable ourselves. So that self-awareness piece, like understanding ourselves, understanding our own stuff, understanding the things that are important to us, the values that are important to us, how we see the world, like all of that stuff is really important, because that's part of what we bring to the table. But we need to bring it conscious as much as we can. We need to bring it kind of consciously. Alertness to the environment and the group. So thinking like, who's this group of young people that I'm encountering? Do I know them? What's the dynamics between them? Like being able to spot, you know, maybe there's a leader amongst them. How do they interact with each other? You know, being alert to all of those, like those things. People talked about listening, active listening. So actually, I could have put a slide up actually about listening, because that would have been a good one, about like really hearing what's going on, and really hearing what young people are trying to say. What young people say and what they mean is not always the same thing. Often they will say and do things that help protect, like what young people practice is psychological safety. And so if they don't know you very well, they may well muck about or joke about or not take things very seriously, or even be a little bit aggressive maybe, or whatever they might be. And some of that is just them trying to navigate how they make themselves feel emotionally and psychologically safe. And so really listening to them and hearing what they're really trying to say and really trying to do is really important, like part of the process. Listening to their stories that begin to emerge kind of from underneath, getting to know them as individuals is important. Body language, being mindful of your own body language. There's a great book actually. There's a guy called Pip Wilson who is an aging rocker of a youth worker who's used to work for a centre called the Mayflower Centre in London, in Canning Town, and then was the head chief executive of, or general secretary, I think they were called, of Romford YMCA for a long time. He wrote a brilliant book called Gutter Feelings, which is again a really old book, but well worth reading. And he talks about a time when he was talking to some young people in the street who were getting a bit aggressive and stuff, and he sat down on the pavement. And because he sat down on the pavement, which is quite a courageous thing to do, it diffused the whole situation, because young people just didn't know what to do with the fact he'd sat on the pavement. So being aware of kind of how your body language is doing, you know, have you got your arms folded? Are you speaking like aggressively? What personal space are you giving them? Like all that kind of stuff is important part of the process. Asking open questions, so showing an interest in them. Like I asked that group of young people I described earlier about in my street. I was like, just how have you found lockdown? How have you found COVID? Like as an open question, they could do what they wanted, like with it. And actually, because I asked the open question and then I teased it out of them a little bit, they were willing to have a conversation like about it. And it ended up with that whole conversation about they were bored and wanted something to do. Make sure your communication is intentional. So thinking on your feet is important. So thinking about what you're saying and why you're saying it. You don't have to overthink it, but just being aware of where this conversation is going, like whether you're trying to continue the conversation, whether you're trying to take the conversation in a different direction, whether you want to challenge some of the things that are being said, whether you're beginning to think about ending that conversation. All those kind of things are an important part of the process. Negotiation is important, like even things like, would it be all right if we pop back next week? See if you're going to be here, like would it be okay if we came and said hello? You know, negotiating those things. So giving young people agency, giving young people that sense of where they're at. Appropriate challenge where necessary. So if they start being racist or whatever, like challenge them with what they want to do. Think about when to withdraw. So when has that interaction had its time? When is it time to leave that conversation or leave even that time kind of with them? Being flexible, I think someone described that earlier. Always be ready for the unexpected, but also you are the unexpected. So you will bring perspectives and stories and ways of seeing the world that they've maybe not encountered before. And actually that can be a real eye-opener for young people and make them think again. So there's just a few thoughts about like some of the things we need to bring with us. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our breakout groups. That's right, isn't it? Breakout groups is next. And the last part we're going to do tonight is like, what do we need to do to actually do this? So we've talked about skills and qualities. What do we need to do? And so what I want you to think about is your first encounter. Like, what if you've done this before, you can recount the story of when it happened. If you've not done it before, have a think about it. Think about your first encounter with a group of young people. What are you, like? How are you going to approach it? Are you going to bring anything with you? Just play out what you think that. How you might start a conversation. Just think about all of those, like those things, just for a few minutes, and then you'll come back. We'll show another video, and then I'm going to do a last bit about what you need to do to get going. Is that right? Great. So you'll get stuck into groups. So see you in a bit. Great. Welcome back, everybody. So was that all right? Good conversation again. Very good. Excellent. So we're going to show another little video. So here we go.
I would take stock of the situation, and I would look around in the community and see what's happening already. I would find out what other churches are doing, find out what community groups there are out there, and just to kind of see what the role of the church is within that. And I think it's kind of stepping out and just, I think also it's finding out what the needs are in that local area as well, because they can shape and change depending on the different area that you're working with. So for some of the more rural areas, that rurality might be difficult because of transport, because of being isolated, being cut off. Whereas in more urban areas, there can be a lot of condensed work that's happening. It's kind of looking at what is happening, so you don't end up doing something on your own away from what somebody else is doing.
And there's challenges around what you find when you go. So it is important to be clear around your safeguarding policy. Yeah. It's really important to be clear about what line you take when you come across kids who are using drugs and drinking underage. Those sorts of challenges are ones that you can sit in a trustee meeting and make a very clear policy, but actually on an evening where you've got a youngster in front of you, you need to have good policies in place, and you also need to have the wisdom of God and some good training to understand how to handle those situations well.
Recognising the skills and expertise that you've got, and don't try to be everything to everyone, but be able to build partnerships. You can refer young people on to other people.
But what we've found in our detached work is that turning up consistently at the same place at the same time, doing that similar route, allows young people to find you there if they want to. Yeah. And the continuity of at least having one face that was there the week before is really helpful in that, because it's the relationship, it's not the label that you wear or the way you identify yourself. They don't connect to an agency or a logo. It's people connecting to people.
People come and go into people's lives all the time. If you're working with people as social workers, they may not even have the same social worker for more than a few months or a year. People want stability. So if you're going to start the project, make sure you're going to be there for the long term. Don't go in and out. And the other thing is to ensure that you've got all the risk assessments, insurance, first aid, safeguarding. All these things are so important, particularly at the moment. But that if you don't have all those things in place before you start, you could go down a road and get stuck. So it's really important to get the particularly risk assessments, particularly if you're working away from your church building. You don't know what you're going to come across. What are you going to do if you get involved in a game of football and kick the ball too hard and hit someone, which happens quite a lot, but you're there as a professional, so you're going to need to know, have you got a first aider available? So all these things that we like just to go out and get on with things, but having the preparation in advance will help so much more.
Pray, pray and pray.
Yeah.
Have time to pre-brief and debrief.
Mm.
That's really important.
Yeah.
Don't worry about making mistakes. God has a lovely way of using those. And just be real. Just be people of integrity. And listen more than you talk. Thinking about those kind of little questions that are in. But then it's actually about asking open questions and shutting up and letting young people talk about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And asking questions that will allow them to talk about some stuff that's of interest to them.
Yeah.
And not feeling that you've got to have neat answers, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned so much from the wisdom of young people who I meet, and sometimes that's wrapped up in a really inane conversation about, I don't know, just all the kind of posturing of, but actually to listen to young people is to begin to have a real relationship with them. Actually, we're there to live out the love of Christ, and he believes they matter. So that'd be my main tip, is to listen more than talk.
Great. So I'm just going to do this last little bit. So hopefully you got some discussion going about your first encounter. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about to make sure we get there on time for a little bit, and then we'll have a bit of discussion about that, if that's all right. So what do we need to do in order to get ourselves going? If this is a kind of area of work that we want to do, connecting with young people outside the church, connecting with young people at the moment where they're kind of out in the streets. I think, Sam, you put about some people about reconnecting with young people you already know. We've done a lot of that, where young people we already have relationships with, and this just applies just as much to that piece of work, but there's some other things you can do with that as well. So what are the things you need to think about? You need to put the right structures in place. So I think it'd be really good, obviously tonight, hopefully has whetted your appetite, but to do a bit of training about doing detached work. Just a session will get you going, but do a little bit of training. Some of that could be safeguarding training as well as training in terms of going out and meeting young people and building relationships. Make sure you've got the right oversight and support procedures in place, and make sure you've got the right recording mechanisms. In a minute, I'm going to just whiz you through a bit more, but also I sent Sam earlier today a few resources, including guidance from the National Youth Agency and the Federation for Detached Youth Work, a couple of our Worth Unlimited templates that you could use. So Frontier Youth Trust is a really good organisation for this stuff as well. So there's a few resources for you to pick up on. So I'm just going to kind of touch base with it, but there are some more resources that you can tap into with all of that. Worth would be happy to help the URC with stuff. I'm sure Sam's got stuff from her own experience and stuff that you can put in place. So just make sure you've got those things. I'm sure some of you have done this already, but it's like a bit of a community profile, a bit of a study of your community. What is going on in your community? What are the assets in your community? What is going on for young people kind of in your community? Who else cares about young people? Someone talked about the bowls. Was it a bowls club like earlier? Like, if you've got something like that in your community, why not pop in and say, like, we're doing some work with young people, like in the local community. Is engaging with young people something you do? Is that something you'd be interested in? All that kind of stuff. So a bit of community mapping is a really good kind of starting point. Even if all you do, I think walking the streets is a good thing. Phoning people up, phoning up other agencies and stuff and asking them what it is that they do. Getting to know people like your local police force, that's a really, like your local neighbourhood sergeant, for example, that's a really good piece of work to be able to do. Get a map out of your area and just kind of plot on it, like all of the assets, etc. And then the next bit you can do is then also do some observation. So you don't need to go and have conversations with young people yet. Just go and observe different times of the day and in the evening, like where young people hang out, what kind of groups they hang out in, what do they do? Do they, you might have a group of young people who skateboard, you might have a group of young people who hang out in the bus stop. You might have groups that are gendered, so you might have a group of young women, for example, that hang out in the park, or all of that kind of observational stuff, and recording that so that you've got a picture. That's what you need, is a picture of what is going on, like in your local area. So I wouldn't advise just jump, unless you know your patch really well, or you've already been doing some of this work. I wouldn't advise just jumping in. I would advise doing these 3 steps to get yourselves going first. So keep sticking stuff in the chat if you've got queries or questions and stuff as I kind of go through this this little bit. But here's some of the things that you need. You should always do a risk assessment. I know that for some people can be very boring and feels a bit bureaucratic, but it is really important. Someone earlier talked about young people hanging out underneath a bridge, for example. Well, a risk assessment would be, is that a safe place? Is that an isolated place? Is that a place where other people could see you, etc.? So, what are the risks that you could run? What happens if you come across a group of young people who are drinking underage? What happens if you come across young people who are smoking weed? What happens? All of those things, a risk assessment just enables you to work through the process of those things and about what you're going to do with them. You should have identification. So you should have like who you're from, and on the back of it, you should have some contact details. So if somebody wants to see your identification, there's somebody senior that they could phone. So if you're working for a church, for example, you might put the church minister's name and number on there. You can also do other things, like you can wear branded hoodies or t-shirts or UV vests or whatever it is that you want. There's things that you can wear that identify like yourselves, but that is really important, because otherwise you can imagine nosy neighbours kind of phoning the police up and going, there's this random group of adults talking to these kids, like what is that about? Make sure you let other agencies know. So like I say, I would recommend getting to know the police, for example, in particular, like in your area, but other agencies that happen to be about, which can be all kinds of churches, schools, community centres, the local doctors. There might be a myriad of other agencies in your particular community that you want to let know that you're out and about, partly for your own safety, and partly so that you've built some connections with them so that you can connect young people into some of those things. Make sure you've got emergency contact numbers and mobile phones on you, so you know who to phone if there's a problem. And also, if you come across young people who've got a problem, who to phone. So that's always a good little bit of your research, is to have some emergency contact numbers there to use. Clear exit plan. So what happens if something doesn't quite go right, or you need to move away? Like just making sure you know how you're going to remove yourself from that situation. Is someone going to pick you up? Are you going to get public transport? If you're in the park, what exits are there to the park? Knowing those kind of things, just to keep yourself safe and well. Local information, so knowing actually what you can point young people kind of towards. Did you know that you're interested in football? Do you know there's a football club down the road? Have you ever thought about going along? That kind of stuff. There's a local youth club. Did you know that existed? Have you ever thought about going along to that? Doing some safeguarding training and make sure you got a safeguarding policy, is really important. Doing your DBS checks, so don't go out if you've not been checked. I presume that in the URC you have all these kind of protocols and stuff that you need to do, but just reinforcing those things. Make sure you've got a mechanism for recording. I've sent Sam a template recording sheet. It's really good practice to kind of, when you finish a session, to kind of just make a few notes about how long you were out for, who you encountered, etc. Mainly for learning, mainly so that you keep an eye on progress, but also just in case anybody asks you or challenges you, you can say, no, actually we were out between these times and we were here and we did encounter these young people. So there's an accountability process for it. Always go out in at least pairs. I know that's probably teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, but never do it by yourself. And always be clear about what you're trying to achieve in that session. So is this a new group of young people that you're trying to get to know? Are you trying to build relationships? Are you trying to go deeper with those relationships with young people? Are there particular young people in that group that you're particularly concerned about and you want to see if there's a way you can have a conversation with them, etc.? So whole bunch of different things for you to think about. Does that all make sense? Is that all okay? So like I say, I've sent some resources and stuff for you to use. Cool. So last few minutes, just to kind of go through, I asked you to think about, team brief and debrief. Absolutely, Tom, absolutely. You're entirely right. You shouldn't just rock up. You should, like I say, meet together beforehand, pray together beforehand. Be clear, today we're going to go to this park and we're going to try and encounter this group of young people. Of course, you might come across a different group of young people at a different stage of your relationship, and that's all fine. But have some intentionality to it. And then, like you say, have a bit of a debrief at the end. I think the way to go about detached youth work is to build relationships as normally as you can. And so you would never build a friendship with somebody where you were having the most in-depth, well, hardly ever, the most in-depth conversation in your first meeting with them. Like, you would probably, say hello to them. You would introduce yourself. You might ask, do you live close around here? All that kind of introductory kind of stuff, and always leave it with a positive. So don't elongate it out, but always be clear about who you are. Like with young people, say, you might spend a few times just passing them and saying hello, nice to see you. Like, I'm Tim. I'm from the local youth work project. Do you guys hang around here much? We're going to be out and about. Do you, be good to see you in the future. And you might toddle off. You have to play it a bit by ear, but build relationships in a really natural kind of way. Don't do it artificially. It's weird for young people if you do it weirdly with them. Young people might actually be really open to a conversation with you, like early on, in which case you can go faster, like with that process. But go at this. Well, in community work, you talk about going at the speed of trust. So go at the speed of trust, the amount of trust that young people have with you, and that will grow kind of over time. And lots of people take things that become talking points. So if you've got a dog, walk the dog like that. I've got a dog now, after 24 years of resisting a dog. And it's a real talking point when you go out and about, because people want to talk about the dog and they want to say, can I stroke the dog, and all that kind of stuff. So suddenly it starts a conversation with people. If you've got young children, like, do it safely, but like just pushing your pram with your baby in it can cause a talking point with young people. Somebody talks about hot chocolate, take drinks out with you. I knew somebody who took radio controlled cars out with them because they're a group of young people who are quite into all of that. You might do a bit of a community survey and say, like, actually we're going and asking young people their opinions about what it's like to grow up here, and what the kind of things they would like to see here. Like, would you mind if I just had a conversation with you for a few minutes? And that can spark a whole set of conversations. Put up a gazebo in a green space. Take some sports equipment, like, with you. Certain groups of young people, we've done things like wellbeing packs, do you know what I mean, and stuff like, we're just going around with these kind of wellbeing packs, helping people feel a bit better about themselves. Would you like one? It's got this in it. Fancy one? Yeah, all right, I'll take one. Away you go. So you might have a whole bunch of better creative ideas than I've got about what you could do to get a talking point kind of going. But hopefully that makes sense to you. And then basically, I won't bore you with this bit, but basically the relationship grows from contact, so getting to know young people, saying hello to them, kind of them seeing you a bit more regularly, etc., to getting to know them better, exploring a bit more of their lives with them, getting to know them. They'll ask you things like, well, why do you do this? And all that kind of stuff. And, we're interested in young people and we want to see positive things for young people in the community. What do you think about that? What would you like to see happen? Those kind of things. And then I've put the word risk, but basically it becomes, what could we do together? So you might take them away. You might eat together. You might go to the cinema together. There's things that you might begin to do as you know these young people well, that become, well, why couldn't we do these things? Why couldn't we do that kind of stuff together? Does that make sense? That there's a bit of a journey that you go on, like with young people, and you need to know where you're at in the journey with young people, and you need to grow it kind of naturally. Anybody got any comments or questions about that? Does that make sense? And then I'm going to finish by just showing you like our particular way of approaching that. How am I doing for time? There you go. I'm even on time, which is a miracle for me. All make sense? Yeah, speed of trust. Yeah. So I think that's really important. Actually, that's important in community work as much as it is in youth work, but absolutely. I think of trust like an elastic band. like a piece of elastic, sorry. You can stretch it, but you can't break it. So you can pull young people along a little bit, you can help them grow and develop, but if you go too far and too fast, you'll break the elastic, and then the relationship becomes everything. So you don't just have to go at the speed that young people will go at. You can kind of encourage them and push them along a little bit, but you can't break that piece of elastic. That's the way I always think about that. And it's a good way to think about behavior policy and stuff, like how can I challenge a young person but try not to break that relationship kind of with them. Cool. So almost there. So this, I've sent this to Sam, so you can see this in a bit more like detail. But if you're really interested, I suspect some of the people who did the interviews would have been able to describe a journey a little bit like this, which is a journey of development with young people. And this is the way Worth Unlimited thinks about it. So we think about it in these kind of 5 stages. So going from contact to getting to really know young people, to helping young people do things together, so doing activities together. We might even do some residentials with them. We might encourage them into other activities, to doing things that really deepen those relationships or maybe address particular like issues, and then really helping young people feel part of something, part of community life, part of their relationship with you, almost like family, like with you. And so we go on that journey with young people. Young people come back and forth with that. Like, it's not a linear process, but hopefully that makes some sense that getting to know young people takes time, but over time you can get to know them better, and then there's more that you can do with them, and then you can help them grow and develop a little bit more. And I think some of the interviews kind of reflected that. And then finally, just a few examples of some of the things that we do that are a little bit different. So we use allotment space and green spaces a bit to invite young people into, and that's a really good way at the moment of getting. So if any of you are gardeners and stuff, that's a great way to get to know young people. Like, find your local Muga, and play basketball with them or football like with them. This is a group of young people in London that we started a basketball club with, because we got to know them actually through the youth bus, which is the other photo. We got to know them on the youth bus, and then they were really into basketball. So we were like, well, actually, we'll get some funding then, and we'll start a basketball club. Do you want to start a basketball club? And then we started meeting them every week doing a basketball club, and then we take them to games and all that kind of stuff. And it was a really good tool to do that. So there's a few kind of creative things that you can do. And then just Sam's point about, if you already know some young people, like in the COVID times, we've done walk and talks with young people. This is a picture of a young person that we know who has given permission for this photo. Doorstep conversations with young people. So knocking the door, taking a step back to the end of the drive, sitting on a chair or sitting on the ground. Young person comes and sits on the doorstep, and you have a conversation like with them. You could do that in a small group. You could have like 5 or 6 young people with socially distanced chairs, for example, like, and sit outside to be able to do that. So there's a few kind of examples. Consent, like, so you don't, you only need consent if you're doing a regulated activity with young people. So if you're just spending time with them in the park, that's one thing. If you are taking them somewhere or doing something with them, that's when you need like consent to do something. Other than that, like, you're in a public space, and so you don't need consent for that. That, I think, my friends, will do, if that's all right, because I think that's probably my time. Yes, that is my time up. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that wasn't too whistle-stop Tory. I hope that gave you something to think about. And I hope that we get the chance to do some stuff like this again. I hope that this is the start of a beautiful friendship between Worth Unlimited and the URC, that we can maybe do some things together that impact upon young people's lives. But thank you for your time and for inviting me. And I guess I'll hand back to Sam, presumably.
So that's it. So a huge thank you to Tim for giving up his evening to be with us and sharing all his wisdom. I've seen from the comments how much people have appreciated all that you've shared with us, Tim. That's been great. And thank you everyone else for your time, your energy, for your commitment to young people, and for being here and contributing to this evening as well. And I'll just close in prayer, but just to remind you that we will be in contact by email in the next day or two with the resources that Tim was talking about, the links that we've shared this evening, and links to the full interviews with those 3 youth workers if you wanted to hear a bit more about what they've got to say. So Lord, thank you for the encouragement and the challenge that you have given to us this evening. We pray for ourselves and ask that you would help us to hear your call. We pray for all the other people we may need to be prepared to step out with us. And we pray most of all for the young people in our communities. We pray for their safety. We pray for their well-being, and we pray that they would have ways of knowing how loved they are. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much for spending this part of it with us.
Take care all.
Bye-bye.